Simone. And thank you for setting this up as well and inviting me along today, because the more people I can tell, the better that is for us as well. So as I said, my name's Claire Hanson. I work for WEA and we are distributing ESF community grants in Greater Manchester. And we currently have what we call a round open to bid into. So I'm going to screen share. I'm going to go through a few slides with you just to explain what the funding's for, who can apply for it, how to apply for it, a few of the eligibility criteria and whatnot. And then I'm going to take all your questions at the end. So I will ask, you know, if as I'm talking, if something occurs to you, then either hold that thought and just ask me at the end, or pop it on the chat and I'll again pick it up at the end. Either way is absolutely fine. And that's true for when we get to the Q&A portion as well, because I know some people are perfectly comfortable shouting out, and that's brilliant, and some people are more comfortable just popping something on chat. So either works. So here we go. I am going to attempt to screen share. Okay. Okay. So I've introduced myself. You'll also see my colleague Nicola's name on there as well. She's my partner in crime. We look after Greater Manchester together because it's such a big area and a big contract for us. I tend, just on the basis of where we live, I tend to look after the southern boroughs and Nicola tends to look after the northern boroughs, which means that Stockport has got me. So if any of you apply and are successful, I'll be your main point of contact throughout. So a little bit about us as well, a bit about WEA. Why are we looking after these grants? Well, we are a long established charity specialising in adult education in the heart of local communities. We've been doing it for well over 100 years now. And a lot of our roots, we are a national organisation, but a lot of our roots are particularly in the Northwest, and we're really quite proud of that as well. So that's a very little bit about our credentials, more about the grants themselves. So the purpose of community grants really, and the purpose of the way that we're administrating it is to give smaller grassroots organisations a bite of the cherry of that big European funding that can otherwise be quite difficult to access. And it's about reaching those that are hardest to reach communities, hardest to reach individuals. And the overarching aim of the funding is to move people closer to the labour market, either into employment, into further education, or into training. And I really do emphasise closer a lot on that. You know, I'll talk on, I think it's the next slide, about outcomes and who goes into employment and who goes into education. And we are very, very realistic about the fact that it's actually a minority of participants that you're going to get into work. For a lot of those participants, you're going to have a huge impact on their confidence and their skills and their abilities. And we absolutely acknowledge that. And that's what I love about, that's one of the things I love about this funding. In terms of what we've achieved so far, so the contract that we have with ESFA is a 2-year contract from 2019 to 2021. So we started awarding the first grants in October 2019. And so far we've awarded over 108, oh no, I was going to say over 182. We have, but a couple of them have ceased. So we've currently got 182 recipients of grants so far. And we're looking to obviously award more. So far, we've awarded just under £3.5 million. Our contract is worth about £4.5 million. So some quick maths will tell you we've got just over £1 million left to give away. And we are predicted through the projects that we've awarded so far to reach 5,500 participants, which is an impact on an awful lot of lives. In terms of what they can be used for, the types of activity, in a broad brush approach, it's something education-based that gets people closer to the workplace. But as it alludes to on that slide, it's it's not purely employability. That exists. We have projects that are delivering that, but we have projects that are delivering such a broad curriculum. We've got people who are doing art-based projects. We've got people that are doing theatre. We've got one project doing beekeeping. We've got anything you could think of, the whole range and remit, sports, tech, everything. So whatever you can think of, you can do. You know, don't worry about it not being employability based enough. As long as it's improving the participants' skills, improving their confidence, getting them closer to the labour market, then it's a goer as far as an idea is concerned. So a little bit more detail. The grants themselves are for up to £20,000. And my personal advice is I'm very happy. Don't think, oh, I'll only ask for 18 or 19 because it looks a bit better. It doesn't, you know, go for the full 20, absolutely fine. As long as that 20 represents good value for money, go for the full amount would be my advice. We have 5 planned funding rounds, of which this is the 5th. So this is the kind of the last time we're planning to go out and ask for bids. And as I said before, our contract's worth just under 4.5 million. We've got just a shade over £1 million left to give away. Those little boxes there, they tell you what our targets are with ESF. So our target is to engage 3,500 people, and we're currently on track to engage 5,500. So we're well on track with that. Even, I must add, with the impact of COVID, which has knocked that down a little bit, we're still going pretty strong with that. Now I'm going to nip across to programme targets. I told you it was about getting people closer to work. So overall, in our contract, as I said with ESF, we need to get 17% of participants into employment and 14% into education training. So as you can see, that is the minority of participants that those outcomes are for. We like to think that they're pretty realistic, pretty achievable, even in this climate. And I've said to so many people this week, who knows what the job market is going to look like in October, but I still think 17% and 14% are actually fairly realistic. And that's one question we ask you in your, you know, if you're going to apply in your bids, we say, okay, so of your participants, what do you predict you're going to get into an employment or education? Some people predict higher than that. Some people predict lower than that. It depends on the client group they're working with. My advice again would be, don't put numbers in those boxes because you think they're numbers that we want to see. Put numbers in those boxes that show us that you understand the people you're working with. That would be my advice on that. And then in terms of those priority groups, I'll talk about participant eligibility in a bit, which in a nutshell is just anybody who is unemployed or economically inactive. However, ESF set as these particular priority groups as well. People who are over 50, ethnic minorities, people with disabilities or health issues, lone parents and women. Again, I don't want you to worry too much about those priority groups. That's for me to worry about on my overall contract. I want you to worry about knowing the client group that you usually work with and how best you can serve them. And across the board, it all levels out. But it's just worth sharing that with you as well, because leading on to their ESF's priority groups, we work very closely with GMCA as well. And they say, well, hang on a minute, these are our priority groups. We'd really love it if you've got projects that engage these people too. And that's people who are homeless or at risk of homelessness, people with low or no qualifications, people with poor literacy or numeracy skills, and particularly NEETs. And that's something that you don't need to know this, but I'll share with you, is specific to the Greater Manchester contract. So WEA look after ESF community grants in Greater Manchester, in Liverpool and in Lancashire. And Greater Manchester is the only one of those where we admit 16, 17-year-olds onto the projects. In the other contracts, it's only 18 and over, and that's specifically costs of GMCA's priority around NEETs. So again, that's something to bear in mind. And then why adapt? We've called this round Adapt. We've given it a name because I think it just sounds a bit nicer than just giving it a round 1, round 2, round 3, round 4. We've given it a name. And specifically Adapt because that's what we're all doing at the minute and have been doing since March, really. From one week to the next, we're following whatever guidance comes out. And in a nutshell, that's what we're asking you to be really mindful of when you're putting your project proposals together. We're looking for something that can be flexible while lockdown measures are being eased. So do you want to deliver your intervention remotely? Do you want to deliver your intervention face-to-face using social distancing? Do you want to use a blended approach? Do you want to start off remotely and move to face-to-face as lockdown eases? All these things we want you to think about. We want to continue to support those furthest from the workplace. However, we're also aware that there will be a large number of people, as we predict from September, October onwards, who are newly unemployed, who aren't used to being in that situation, who perhaps are going to be looking for a whole new career. Maybe the job they have done up to now doesn't exist anymore. So although we're continuing to support those long-term unemployed, there's a whole new client group to think about as well. So bear that in mind. It's about building resilience in those who have been hardest impacted by social distancing, by isolation. Bear that in mind. And digital skills as well, removing barriers for those with low digital skills. When we first went into lockdown, I heard the argument a lot, oh, well, we can't do this because our participants don't have the digital skills. Well, give them the digital skills. There has never been a better time to do it. You know, everybody needs those skills now. So let's try and remove those barriers. And I'll talk about some of the things you can do around that in a little bit. I've probably already said this, but about being able to adapt to a changing situation. And the goal, we all know the goalposts are constantly changing at the minute. So we are asking you to try and preempt that a little bit. And building skills for a workforce that operates differently. You know, I've said the job market might be different in a few months, but the workplace might look very different. The way that we're working at the moment is different from what we're used to doing in the past. So is that something that might be here with us for the foreseeable? So these are all the things that we want you to think about when you're putting a proposal together. So this is a slightly drier bit. I've talked about our big ideas and our ideology and all those things. This is a bit more of the nitty-gritty of, well, can you apply or can you not? So we are open to third sector organisations that are run on a not-for-profit basis. So that could be a constituted voluntary or community group, could be a social enterprise, as long as it's not for profit. It could be a registered charity, could be a community interest company, it could be a community limited by guarantee, a company limited by guarantee. It cannot be a company limited by shares. If it's a CIC limited by shares, then we can work something out. Basically, we come to an arrangement where we ring fence those shares for the duration of the grant. So that's the type of organisation. You have to have been in operation for a minimum of 12 months because we need to be able to see a track record of handling grants, of handling funds. In terms of the size of your organisation, we have, as we've gone through the rounds, these figures have gradually got bigger and bigger and bigger. We've widened the net to let more people in, basically. You can't employ more than 49 FTE. And just to be super clear, that's FTE as in full-time equivalent. You could have 70 part-timers. You know, it's not a head count, it's an FTE. And your annual turnover can't be any more than £5 million. You have to have a governing document or a constitution, and you have to have your own independent bank account into which the grant can be paid. And also you can't already be in direct receipt of ESF funding or ESF co-financing with those other organisations. And it's worth me highlighting there that the key word that in that sentence is direct receipt. If you're subcontracting for somebody who is in receipt, that's not a problem. You just can't be in direct receipt yourself. So that's organisational eligibility. So in terms of the people that you're helping, in terms of the people that you're enrolling onto the programme, as I said before, they need to be 16 or over. They can be 16 in a day, as long as they're over 16. And there's no upper age limit. It doesn't cap at 68 or anything like that. However, we ask you to use your professional judgment with that. If you have somebody who is late 60s, early 70s, who comes along and wants to enrol because retirement's not for them and they want to be more active and they want to get into volunteering or whatever it is, then perfect. It's ideal for them. If they're of that age and they're thinking, actually, retirement is exactly for me and I'm quite happy as I am, then it's not the fund for them because they don't need moving closer to the workplace. And then unemployed, economically active, or at risk of redundancy, and that's only recently that we've been able to mention that last one. So unemployed is kind of self-descriptive. Economically inactive is where someone has no independent income of their own. So it could be a spouse whose partner goes out to work and earns the income, but they don't, they've got no income of their own. It could, if we think back to NEETs, could potentially be a 17-year-old who's got no income of their own. Their parents are the ones that are financially supporting them. So that's examples of your economically inactive. And then just to clarify about at risk of redundancy, it needs to be formally at risk of redundancy. So their employer is putting them through a redundancy consultation process. And it doesn't, unfortunately, cover people who are on furlough because they're part of the job retention scheme, are still classed as employed. Although projects for this round will be starting as furlough is winding down, so it might be kind of less of an issue, to be honest, by then. What they also need to be is legally resident in the UK with an NI number, so have the right to live and the right to work in the UK, and specifically be resident in Greater Manchester. The money is for Greater Manchester. We want it to stay in Greater Manchester and benefit the people of Greater Manchester, so they need to have a GM postcode when you enrol in them. We do sometimes have, like say, we've got projects that run in Bolton that sometimes someone will come along and technically they're in the Lancashire side, in Stockport. Just be careful that they're not in the Cheshire side of the border, if you like. It's just something to bear in mind. So how to apply? This round opened on the 1st of July and it closes on the 22nd of July, which is exactly a week away from now. So this is the week where I get incredibly anxious because you can guarantee every single application will come in on the 22nd and not a day before. So everything crossed for then. As I've said, we've got just over £1 million to give away. And if you think £20,000 per grant, that could be 50 or more organisations benefiting. So there is plenty to go around. Please don't think, oh, it's not worth me doing it. There's not going to be, I don't stand a chance. If your bid's good enough, then yes, you do. There's enough to go around. I'll share these slides afterwards. I'll send them on to Simone to share with you. That link there takes you straight to our website, where you can look at those eligibility criteria again, just to double check, does that apply to me? And then you can download the application form, the guidelines, and some FAQs. We are very low tech. It is just a Word document that you can download and type into and then email off to us. It's not a sort of online portal or anything. We thought about that, but we just shied away from it. Again, my top advice is the application guidelines, they might be a little bit dry and they might be a little bit lengthy, but it is worth taking your time to read them rather than just rushing into the application, because I always think of it, I used to work in HR, and I always think of it, those guidelines are like your person specification and your job description. If you know them, you know what to put into your application, you know if you fit it. We do ask for some supporting documentation as well, which I'll talk about in a minute. So as I said, it's very low tech. It's just a Word document. You submit by email to the address at the bottom of it, which I'll give you as well. I've put on that slide by 12 noon on Wednesday the 22nd. I don't mind if it's 12 noon or 5 p.m. or even 8 p.m. as long as it's the 22nd of July. If it's the 23rd of July, then it's missed it. But as long as it's with us by the end of Wednesday, that's not a problem. The earliest date you'll be able to actually get started on the project is the 1st of October, and you would need to be wrapped up by the 31st of May next year. And that end date is a really, really concrete end date because it ties into when our contract with ESF finishes. So we really haven't got any wiggle room on that like we have had on earlier rounds. I said you'd need some supporting documents, and they're listed on there. We need to see that constitutional governing document for your organisation. We need to see your most recent set of accounts. We need to see an annual report. We completely acknowledge that not every grassroots organisation is going to have a glossy, shiny annual report. If you haven't got one, all we're after is a sheet of A4 that tells us what you've done in the last 12 months, that shows us a bit of a track record, if you like. And then we need some policies. We need your health and safety policy, your equality and diversity policy, and it says on there your adult safeguarding policy. If you are going to work with some of those needs that I was talking about earlier, it needs to be adult safeguarding and child safeguarding, or a combined policy. But if you're only planning on working with over 18s, just an adult safeguarding is absolutely fine. In terms of what happens after the deadline, a lot is the answer. Nicola and I will go through and do basic due diligence. So we'll make sure that, you know, your accounts tally with what you're putting on the form, and you've not gone over word counts on anything, and all your supporting documents are in order. So we'll go through and do that basic due diligence. Then we send the applications off to independent assessors, and the assessors are people that come from the sector within Greater Manchester. So they might come from GMCVO, they might come from GMCA, some come from the local authorities, some come from, a few come from DWP as well. So it's a bit of a mixed bag, but it's people who know what they're looking for and know what they're talking about, and they're external from WEA. So we don't have any influence over those assessments. Each application, as I said, goes to 2 independent assessors. Then they send them back to us. We work out an average score, and then we have a moderation process. So we have panels that moderate the scoring to make sure it's fair and consistent. From that, we can make recommendations on what to fund and what to not to the steering group. And again, the steering group are independent from the kind of organisations that I just talked about, and they will either accept those recommendations or not. To be perfectly frank, we generally accept the recommendations that we give them. So in terms of how long that all takes, you get your application into us on the 22nd of July, you'll get a decision, you'll hear back from me on the 28th of August. So it's just over a month to turn that around. And as you'll remember, I said earlier, the projects start the 1st of October. That means throughout September, we support you with, you know, getting your grant agreement to you, getting your payments to you, all those kind of things. So that's the application process. I think I've talked about a lot of this, but I'll just reiterate it anyway. If you're not successful, we do provide feedback, and it is meaningful feedback that you can actually use for subsequent bids. It won't just be a cut and paste generic, we thought it was weak in this area. We will genuinely give you useful feedback, and we'll also signpost you to partner organisations. So for you guys in Stockport, we'll signpost you to Sector 3. But whatever borough somebody came from, we'd signpost them to the organisation in their borough to give them a bit of help for next time, really. If you are successful, we'll invite you along to induction. It says on there online, I still live in hope that by September we might actually be able to do face-to-face inductions, but you never know. One way or another, we'll do an induction with you. We'll also do a one-to-one meeting where I'll talk about a little bit with you about your project, about the numbers that you put in your bid, about, you know, bringing it to life a little bit. And we'll go through the technicalities of signing your grant agreement, getting your documents off you, and what you can expect from us in the future. In terms of how we pay the grant, so as I've said, it's maximum of £20,000. So based on that, based on if you go for 20,000, we pay 25% upfront, which is £5,000. Then at an agreed midpoint, we pay another 35% upfront, which is, by my maths, another £6,000. I could be wrong. I think it's 7 actually. Yeah, it is 7. Again, you get that upfront once you've evidenced to us how you've spent the first 25%. And then you don't get the last 40%, so you don't get the last 8,000 until right at the end in arrears. So it's 25% upfront, then another 35% in advance, the final 40 in arrears. So be really, really aware of what you're walking into with that. You'll have to cash flow up to 8,000 of it yourself to get to the end. So you obviously need to be aware of that and mindful of that. So what we score you on, these are the criteria that those independent assessors look at, and I'm just going to highlight them really briefly. Value for money. Don't think that is a simple formula. Amount they've asked for, number of learners, number of learning hours. It's not that straightforward. Yes, they'll think about that, but they'll think about, well, what are these learners getting? You know, how much are they going? What are the learner benefits? Are they walking away from this with some sort of accreditation? Is it a particularly difficult client group? And that's why it's low numbers, because they're going to need more one-to-one support. So we do know what we're looking for in terms of value for money. So don't think, oh gosh, I'm going to put a huge participant number in there because that's going to make it look better. It's like I said before, we're looking at, do you know who you're working with? Is it realistic? That's where the good scores come in, really. But to preempt what people always ask, well, what's a good number of participants? Average number of participants would be between 20 and 30. Some are a lot more than that, some are a lot less. It depends on the client group, but average between 20 and 30 is probably a good benchmark. Overcoming barriers to learning. So why has your client group been so difficult for people to engage? And what are you going to do about it? How are you going to overcome those barriers? That's what we're looking for there. Quality of proposal, I'll stick a pin in and come back to, because that's the weighted criteria. Proving need is about knowing your locality, again, knowing your client group. Why is what you're offering needed where you are and to who you're offering it? Engaging the community, again, links back to removing those barriers and proof of need. Also engaging the community about any partners you might want to work with. Partners in terms of getting people signed up in the first place, but also in terms of pathways when they leave you, who are you going to work with, where are you going to signpost people onto. Learner benefits, again, is about what are the participants getting out of this. And it's about those softer benefits. It's almost about the learning outcomes in a way. So what are they going to have learned as a result of your intervention with them? Quality assurance, we ask you to talk about. We ask everybody to talk about that, whether it's accredited or not. How do you quality assure what you are delivering? How do you ensure it's fair, it's consistent, it's moderated, all those kind of things. Well-structured budget. I have a reputation for banging on about this. It has to add up. I can't tell you how many bids I've looked at with a budget that just doesn't add up. I will talk about budget a little bit more. There's only 3 budget headings to work within. So make sure it's realistic in terms of your staffing costs. You know, we're not looking for you to just be paying people minimum wage to do the project. We're looking for, is this the going rate? Is this what we would expect to see? Things that can go, and it's worth mentioning this, even though I wouldn't ordinarily. In earlier projects, we had a lot of participant costs around travel and refreshments and catering, which is all absolutely to be expected. And community centres are reopening, venues are reopening, but guidance is saying that you basically can't feed people anymore. So be aware of that. Refreshments might not be eligible just yet. It might change as time goes on, but that's something to bear in mind. We were advised that stuff like, water coolers only, no tea, coffee. So just be mindful of that. I'll go back to quality proposal now before I finish that slide off. Your quality proposal is your big idea. What are you doing? What are your sessions going to consist of? That's the part of the form that gives you 500 words to tell us what is it you're going to do? What's the structure of the project? So really bring it to life in there. We want to be able to read that and understand exactly what your plan is. And those last three, health and safety, safeguarding, and equality and diversity. Now, I mentioned before that we ask you to send us your policy for those. It also asks you in the application, more specifically, how you're going to apply those policies, how you're going to have regard for those issues. Do not ever put in those boxes, well, I refer to my policy, or it says in my policy this. And that's for two reasons. Firstly, Nicola and I check those policies as part of due diligence, but they don't go to the assessors. So they're not going to see your policy. They've got no idea what's in it. And secondly, it's about understanding what issues do you think are going to come up around health and safety, safeguarding and E&D, and how are you going to address those? And think about, particularly because we've called it adapt, because you might be doing some remote provision, you might be doing some face-to-face provision. Health and safety for a start is going to be completely different, isn't it? You're not going to be thinking, if you're doing remote provision, you're not going to be thinking about trip hazards, but you're going to be thinking about display screen equipment. It's answering that question with regard to your particular project, if that makes sense. So they're what you scored on. That's the best advice I can give you around those. And these are just my general top tips. And I usually sound really pedantic when I bang on about these, but it's because I've been looking at these applications for a good while now. And these are easy things to get wrong, but equally so easy to get right. All questions fully answered, and that ties in with all word counts adhered to. So we give you a word count for every question. For most of them, it's 250. For the big one, it's 500. If we're looking for 250 words, a 100 word answer is not going to tell us everything we need to know. Go for the word count. At the same time, stick to the word count, because it's always like, well, when you were at school and your teacher would say, I'll read to the word count and then I'm going to stop marking. It's exactly the same thing, except it's a little bit harsher, because at that gateway stage, Nicola and I will delete anything above the word count, and the assessors won't even see it, because we don't want, they're doing us a huge favour by scoring the applications. They do it unpaid, voluntary. We don't want to give them reams and reams of words to go through. You might think I'm joking when you see the form and how big it is when I say we don't want to give them reams and reams, but we honestly do try to keep it tight. So that's a word on word count. Clear, easy to read formatting. The form is defaulted to Arial 11. Please, please, please leave it at Arial 11. Don't change it to Comic Sans or some sort of handwriting font, as I have seen people do. Stick to the font that's there. It's there because it's easy to read. Again, it's about making life easy for the assessors. And these are just around, it links back to what I was just talking about, evidence of why do you know people need what you're offering. Put some stats in there, link to a study, tell us why you know there's demand for this activity, why you know it's going to work. Budget, I've talked about clearly defined and fully complete. Make sure it adds up, each subheading adds up. Make sure you think of everything you want to put in your budget. I mean, we do give you a chance to read, if you're successful, Nicola and I, when we work with you, we'll say, yep, we know life changes, things change, let's reprofile your budget. That's okay. But when an assessor's looking at it, they want to see that you've thought of everything. They don't want to see anything glaringly missing, or they didn't budget anything for room hire. What were they thinking of? They're thinking they're delivering remotely. But, if there's something that's obviously missing, they're gonna think, oh, they're not thinking their plans through. Again, your learning activity is fully outlined. Again, that's that 500 word question. Really make it as clear for us as you can. Don't worry about just having to put full text in. If you want to put a graph in, if you want to put a table in to break it up, you know, just to make it a little bit easier to read, then do that. That's welcome. And benefits to participants clearly outlined. So it is about those outcomes I talked about earlier. How many people are going to get into employment? How many people do you think are going to go on to further training? But it's also about those softer outcomes. What are they going to get out of it? What are the benefits to those participants? So that's what we're looking for. I promise I won't talk for much longer now. Just a word about budget. So as I said, your budget's split into 3 main headings: employee costs or staffing costs, participant costs, and then anything else. So, you know, it's not massively complicated. It's just those 3 main headers. And as I said, download the application guidance when you download the application form. Everything you need to know about eligible expenditure is in Annex 1 of that guidance document. But I did want to say a little word about removing barriers to access in terms of digital. So 2 things you can do. You can purchase equipment for use by participants. So you can purchase, you know, Kindles, tablets, Chromebooks, whatever it is, within limits, which I will talk to you about on the next slide. The key thing is that equipment remains the property of the organisation. So the participants can use it for the duration of the project, but you do need to take it back in afterwards, and then you can use it on subsequent projects. What you can also do is buy data packages. So a lot of people have said to us, look, my guys, they've got a tablet or they've got a phone, but they've not got Wi-Fi and they keep running out of data. They haven't got enough to do Zooms and whatnot. So you can buy buy them a dongle, buy them a 4G data package. That's absolutely fine. What I need to draw your attention to, though, is it's got to be reasonable. You need to evidence all expenditure, and it can't be supported beyond the end of the project. So if you're running a project for, say, 6 months, my advice is don't get into a 12-month contract with that data bundle, because you're only going to be able to claim until the end of the project. If you can get into sort of a rolling monthly one instead, that's probably a better bet. And then finally, what can't you spend? You can't spend anything that you can't support with the right evidence. Simone will tell you this. We want proof of spend for everything when you come to put your claim in. And it really might seem like we are picky on that. We are picky on that because we have to be, because everything is subject to audit at any point within the next 10 years. And if anything falls down at audit, ESF can claw back anything that doesn't look right. So we are funny about it because we're protecting you and ourselves from that future risk. You can't spend anything before the agreed project start date. So it's only once you know you've been successful and you've signed your grant agreement that you can start spending. You can't spend against loans, interest, or other financial charges. You can't spend on, well, you can't claim on consultancy fees or staff time for completing the application, because again, it links back to what I said about that's before the project start date. Equipment, you know, I just said you can buy tablets for participants, you can buy laptops for staff if you need to. That capital expenditure can't be for more than £2,000 in total, or 10% of the grant amount. So it's £2,000 if you're applying for the full 20. If you were applying for 19,000, it's £1,900 is the max you can spend on equipment. In terms of an individual piece of equipment, no individual item can be over £1,000. That's a hard limit. And anything that's £500 or more, you'd need to get 3 quotes for. You don't need to go with the cheapest quote, but you need to get 3 quotes. It can't be used for the purchase of a building. I used to think that was ridiculous to say, and then I had somebody ask me if they could buy a shed, and I had to say no. It can't be used for the cost of financial leases, for statutory health and safety training, because it's statutory, should be doing it anyway. Can't be used for bank charges or legal fees, and it can't be used on VAT if you're VAT registered. And I'm going to stop talking for a minute now and stop sharing and pick up some questions. So we've got.
You want me to tell you what's in the chat? Would that be easier?
Give me a minute to have a breath. Yeah.
Okay. So Claire's asking, although I think she thinks you answered it. Do participants have to be over 18?
Yeah, she's right. I did it. It's 16 and over.
I finished typing it, and then you literally said you can be 16 just for this thing. So thank you.
No worries.
And Steve is asking, we're in Cheadle Hume. If we pay Stockport rates, then we're classed as Stockport. Yes, you are.
Yes, you are.
Yeah. So I think the Cheshire thing is confusing in Cheadle because it's Cheadle from some old postal thing, Cheadle, Cheshire, but you're still Stockport.
You're still Stockport.
Yeah.
If you're paying your rates to Stockport, you're Stockport. It is a little bit blurred in places.
And then Tina is asking, can it be used for rent?
It can be used for rent. We have something called an apportionment calculator, which works out all your overheads. So your rent, your gas, your electric, your telephone, your internet, whatever it might be, all your overheads you can put your annual cost of those into this calculator. But then we say, right, so these are your costs for running your premises. How much of your premises are used for this project? And that how much is in terms of floor space. And I've got a lot of projects where it's 100% of the floor space because they've literally got an industrial unit. And how much in terms of time. So if you're open for say 35 hours a week, but you're spending 12 hours a week on this project, then that's the proportion of the rent that we support.
And she's also asking, organisations will need 8k in the bank to survive before the last payment.
Ultimately, yeah. I know different organisations do different, do bits of juggling or whatever it might be, and I can't really advise on that, to be honest. I did have a gentleman I spoke to the other day in Wigan who was saying, and I don't know what it's like in other boroughs, but he was saying there is actually sort of a bridging loan's probably the wrong phrase, but that the local authority puts things in place to kind of ease those kind of situations. But in a nutshell for us, yes, potentially the £8,000 you pay out and we reimburse. The first 12 we pay out and you spend. The last 8 you pay out and we reimburse.
And I think that is maybe a conversation outside of the room about how you juggle funding pots.
Are there any circumstances in which you would withhold that 8k?
There is a clause in the grant agreement that gives us the right to withhold some of the funding if performance has been dire, I would say. If we were in a situation where we'd paid out, like I said, the first 12,000 already, and we'd seen genuinely nothing, no enrolments, no participants, no evidence of activity, in those circumstances, yeah, we would. That said, I've not seen it happen.
Formally, there's a risk to the organisation that they won't get that last 8k.
If they can, what we say is, if you can evidence that you've spent it, we're sort of bound to reimburse it. And to be honest, if we got to, because there's a midpoint claim, so as I said, you get the 5,000 up front, and then when you come to claim the next part of it, we know at that point how well the project is going. If it's to come to us at midpoint, just saying, oh, I've spent all my first lot of money, can I have my next lot of money, but not having got anywhere with the project, then we'd have a serious conversation with you at that point. We wouldn't let it get right to the end before we were having that, really, because it's a risk to us as well.
Yeah.
I've got another question in the chat as well. We are based in New Mills High Peak and have an SK postcode, but we also work in Stockport and Salford.
Right, so as long as you are, it raises a good point. because it's not about whether the organisation is registered in Greater Manchester, it's about whether the participants are living in Greater Manchester. So even if, like you say, your organisation is maybe over the border, as it were, if you're delivering in Stockport and your participants are living in Stockport, then that's absolutely fine. You know, the money's benefiting them.
Brilliant. Is there any more questions? And feel free, you don't have to just put in the chat, speak up if you're happy to.
I can't believe we've nearly done a full hour, actually. Talked for longer than I thought.
No? Not seeing anything else in the chat, so you obviously did a good job of explaining it.
It's not my first time.
Can I just say thank you? I realised fairly early on that this wasn't going to work for our group, which is a Northwest Community Choir,
Right.
because I was asked to come along, but it is good to make links because we have a community-based choir with people from Stockport, Tameside, and, well, all over Greater Manchester, but mainly from Stockport and Tameside and a bit of Oldham. And I think we're just keen to have a look because we're looking for funding, but it's not the near to employment thing really. And I know these are there's a lot of monitoring and things, obviously, isn't there, with these fundings? It's not a light touch, this one, and we're a very small community-based group, so.
Yeah, there's no hiding the fact that there is a fair bit of paperwork that comes with it. That said, that's a big part of my job once you're up and running, is to make sure you know where you are with that paperwork and that people don't get lost with it. But yeah, it's ESF funding. It's audited within an inch of its life, so there is a fair bit of paperwork.
But thank you anyway.
No problem.
Yeah, can I just second that? Obviously, I'm a member of a theatre, and I think I have the same difficulty of trying to equate how this funding could be used by the theatre. The closest I could get to would be if we arrange for younger people in that NEAT sector to learn sort of technical and stagecraft skills, not the acting.
Yeah.
Then
sorry.
No, go ahead. No, I do know that there is a big skills shortage facing the theatrical industry for technical people getting involved. Everybody wants to be the star of the show rather than, you know, working backstage. Yeah. So we could do it. It's just that I don't think that we could put something in place in a week that would.
It's not long, is it? No. But I have got. I've got a project in Tameside, Guidebridge Theatre. Have just recently been given a grant. Made by Mortals were given a grant in an earlier round, and I don't look after Oldham. Nicola does, but Oldham Coliseum Theatre have got a grant very recently as well. So there is a fair bit of theatre-based stuff going off. So if you, I mean, I know we're on a tight timescale, aren't we? But if you wanted me to put you in touch with those guys, for how they.
That would be great, to see examples of what they've done. Because maybe not get it in this time, but if something similar comes up in a few months'
crossed. Fingers crossed there might be something in the future.
And there's also a question from Ben, and this is a similar issue that I had. That community organisation has been running for 12 months, but only financially for the last 4. So it is about the annual accounts, isn't it, that is the sticking point?
Yeah, I think I'm going to say the eligibility criteria is for 12 months. Have you been running for 12 months? In terms of doing our due diligence on your accounts, it does make that a bit harder. You were in this situation twice, weren't you, really? One when it was like, oh, I'm definitely under 12 months old, I can't do it. And then another when your accounts were just a little bit behind the curve, which we managed to do. I would say to Ben, it might be easier to go with that approach of working with somebody and maybe not being the lead, being the one who works on the project, but not being the lead applicant. If there's someone you can buddy up with, that might be a way forward.
Yeah, so I'm thinking,
great. Yes.
Thinking for Ben, you should probably have a conversation with Solomon you know, because you essentially do similar things. He's definitely been around for more than 12 months. So that's what, so the reason I've got personal experience of this, because I wanted to run a project, but didn't have the 12 months under my belt. So I've co-produced and co-run a project with Pi, Pursuing Individual Excellence, because she was around longer. So she led on the funding, and it's all in her name, but we've kind of delivered much of it together.
Yeah.
So
I think that with you guys saying this would be a co-run project, as me and Solomon have been speaking about, kind of going into partnership down the lines of this specific project. So that's great to know that we can piggyback off the back of his time within the sector. So that's great.
But yeah, I mean, if the organisation's been running for 12 months, I tell you what, let me have a little look into it. Let me just sort of check you. What is it, Ben? Is it a community interest company, or is it a voluntary group?
We're a constitution. So for the first 6 months, it was very organic, just going out, volunteering, bringing groups together, no financial, well, we didn't have to put our hands in our pockets for the first 6 months, but then we've applied for funding halfway through, you know, got a few grand funding. So, you know, so now we have books for the last kind of 4 or 5 months, you know, so.
And again, if anybody wants to have a chat about, you know, if they think that there is a possibility, but they're not sure. Obviously, we've got this week window now, so we've not got much time. But I'm happy to talk to anyone to see if there's anybody I think you might be able to collaborate with. And you know, it's like there's Claire Worthington's on the call. If you want to add like digital stuff, she's your woman to speak to. Plus, obviously, there's Start Point in Woodley. I do careers. There's people who do things around the drama side. So it is actually about sometimes figuring out, is there opportunities that even though you can't provide everything that's needed, and whether that's constitution or activity, is there someone else locally that you'd be happy working with, that you could run the project with? It certainly has worked for us. So
yeah, that's great to know. Simone, I'll probably give you a shout after this.
Please do.
In the next couple of days for a chat, and just to kind of maybe formulate and express some ideas that I've got around this.
Fabulous. And Abba's saying thank you for a well thought through presentation. Steve and Tina are agreeing that you know, theatre skills are great for confidence building. So, so I think that's probably bringing us to a nice close now. And I've popped my email in the chat, so if anybody does want to contact me directly. But like I say, if you want to sign up for the bulletin on the website, keep an eye on what type of events are out there. You know, there'll be other things in the offing, really. So even if this isn't right, it may be that something else comes up in the future. And as I said, last week we recorded the National Lottery one. So if you haven't seen that and you're interested in that, have a look at that as well.
Guys, just a quick one. I might be playing dumb a little bit here, but is the application form on your website, or?
Yeah. So, as I said, I'll send the slides to Simone. Simone will share them with you guys. I have hyperlinks on there to get to the slides, but also if you just Google ESF GM WEA, that'll pretty much take you to where you need to be, and you can get the application form off there. And what I forgot to mention as well is, obviously, on the last page of the slides is my contact details if you've got any questions in the next few days.
Perfect. So and also we'll stick the link, I think it did go out in the bulletin recently, but I'll stick it under the video as well on the website, so you can find it. Helena's going to try and get it up pretty quick. If I can render it and get it on, it takes forever. Okay, Brill. So thanks everyone for coming. Check out Sector 3, and if I can be of any help, let me know. Thanks, Claire. That was brilliant.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.
Well done, Claire. That was brilliant. Bye, Simone. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.